They all ignored me, until he stood up and changed everything. The house was filled with laughter, but none of it belonged to me. I sat alone at the edge of the dinner table, the empty chair beside me, a painful reminder of how much had changed. The voices from the living room were muffled, yet I could hear the jokes. I could hear the sarcasm. I could hear my name being tossed around like I was some forgotten relic, collecting dust in the back of their minds. I wasn't always invisible. There was a time when my opinion mattered, when my voice carried weight, when my presence lit up the room. I raised 3 children. I built a home from scratch with my late husband. I taught in classrooms, volunteered at shelters, cooked for entire neighborhoods, and now I was treated like a burden, like an obligation, like nothing. It started subtly. Missed invitations to family outings, whispers exchanged behind closed doors. They began to assume I wouldn't understand their conversations, that my silence meant ignorance, but it didn't. It meant I was watching, listening, memorizing, every smile that didn't reach their eyes, every chuckle at my expense. Every time they dismissed my stories or rolled their eyes when I mentioned the past, they forgot who I was, or maybe they never really knew. Maybe they saw me as just a phase of life they had to endure, a chapter they wanted to close quietly. They thought I wouldn't fight back, that I'd shrink with age, that I'd fade away without noise. But the truth is, I was learning to hold my pain differently, not as a weight, but as fuel. I'd cry in the bathroom, wipe my face, and return to the room with my back straight. They didn't notice. That's how deep the indifference ran. They didn't see how I flinched when laughter followed my stumbles, how I clenched my fists when they spoke over me, how my meals were always the last to be served, cold and rushed. They said things like, "She's just old," or "She probably didn't hear us." But I did. I heard everything. I felt everything. And one day, so did someone else, my grandson, the only one who ever looked at me with eyes that saw beyond my wrinkles. He noticed the silence in my smile, the tired in my laughter, the ache I tried so hard to hide. He didn't say much at first. He just started sitting with me, listening, being there. And that small act of presence became my salvation, because when no one else stood up for me, he did. When the room turned quiet after another cruel remark, he raised his voice. He challenged their words, their tone, their coldness, and in that moment, everything shifted. Because it only takes one person to remind the world that you're still here, still worthy, still strong. So before we dive deeper into this story, I want you to do something. If you've ever seen someone treated unfairly, an elder, a parent, anyone, and stayed silent, ask yourself why. And if you've ever been the one ignored, forgotten, dismissed, know this. Your silence does not mean weakness. Your story matters. You matter. If this message is reaching you right now, don't scroll away. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications, because what comes next is not just a story. It's a reminder that dignity doesn't age, and strength doesn't fade. Now, tell me in the comments, have you ever had to reclaim your voice when others tried to silence you? Your experience might be the spark someone else needs today. Her name was Cora Whitmore, 79 years old, with silver-streaked hair always pinned into a graceful bun, and eyes that had read more books than most people could imagine. For decades, she had been the quiet force behind the town's public library, where generations came not just to borrow stories, but to hear them. Cora didn't just catalog books, she preserved memory, curated wonder, and carried the sacred art of listening. Her voice was gentle, but firm, her words, precise, chosen like fine crystal, and her presence, unmistakable, even in silence. Cora had been married to Arthur for 50 years. A man of few words but infinite loyalty. He had been the only one who ever truly matched her pace. When he passed away 8 years ago, she mourned him not with wailing, but with long walks, handwritten letters never sent, and mornings spent with their wedding album open beside a lukewarm cup of tea. She never expected to fall in love again, nor did she seek companionship. Her love had been deep enough to last beyond death. So when her son, Michael, and his wife Serena suggested she move in with them for comfort and security, Cora hesitated. But the house had grown too quiet, and her bones no longer moved like they used to. Michael said, "It'll be good for you, Mom. You shouldn't be alone all the time." Serena smiled with perfect politeness. "We have space, and the kids adore you." For a moment, Cora let herself believe that maybe this was the new chapter she didn't know she needed. a home filled with laughter, the aroma of fresh coffee, the sounds of her grandchildren playing piano and bickering over cereal. She packed only the essentials: her favorite cardigan, her journal, a set of fountain pens, and her copy of Wuthering Heights, frayed at the corners. But very quickly, the music changed. The first sign was small. Her bookshelves, which she had arranged alphabetically and by genre in her old home, were now scattered in boxes in the garage. "We just don't have room inside," Serena had said, avoiding eye contact. The guest room that was promised became a corner of the laundry room, curtained off by a floral divider. The grandchildren were kind but distant, and her meals were always an afterthought, prepared last, eaten alone. She tried to make herself useful. She offered to tutor the children, but was told they were too busy. She folded laundry, washed dishes, kept the house immaculate, but her efforts went unnoticed. One evening, after Michael returned from work, she greeted him at the door with a smile and a warm plate of his favorite lemon bars. He gave a tired smile and said, "Thanks, Mom, but Serena doesn't like sweets in the house. We're watching sugar." Days turned to weeks. Then came the phrases, soft at first, like whispers. "You already lived your life, Mom. Let us live ours. Don't complicate things. It's just easier if you don't get involved." Cora would sit by the window, knitting and pretending not to hear, but inside, something cracked. Not her pride that had never been her weakness. What cracked was the illusion. The soft lie she had told herself that family meant sanctuary, that blood guaranteed respect. She had traded the silence of her own home for a house full of voices that rarely said her name. One evening, as they laughed in the living room watching a reality show, Cora walked past them to refill her cup of tea. Her steps were steady, her face unreadable. As she reached the kitchen, she heard Serena say, not unkindly but with something colder than cruelty, "She just hovers, doesn't she? Like a ghost we're not allowed to acknowledge." Cora paused. Her fingers trembled slightly on the teacup, not from weakness, but from restraint. In that moment, the weight of invisibility became a force she could no longer carry without resistance. She began writing again, not poetry or letters, but observations, times, words, behaviors, a quiet documentation of erasure. She titled the first page, "When a Life Becomes Wallpaper." It is easy to look away from an old woman, to assume her mind is fading, her memories foggy. But Cora Whitmore's memory was steel. Her will, iron, and her heart, though bruised, still beat with the fire of someone who once taught a whole town to believe in stories. And what no one saw coming was that this story, hers, was far from over. And the chapter they thought they had written for her was about to be rewritten. Have you ever witnessed someone treated as invisible, only to rise with the strength that silenced a room? Tell me below. They took away my phone, just like that. No explanation, no discussion. "You don't need distractions," they said, as if my conversations, my connections, my life outside those walls were nothing but noise. I sat in my room that evening, staring at the empty nightstand where it used to rest, blinking in disbelief. It wasn't about safety, it was about silencing me. Every time I tried to speak, they'd interrupt. My son would raise his hand like I was a child who needed to be shushed. My daughter-in-law would chuckle, pat me on the shoulder, and whisper, "Not now, Grandma," even when I hadn't said a word yet. My stories, rich with memories, with lessons, with life, became punchlines to jokes they made when they thought I wasn't listening. They laughed at the way I walked, said I shuffled like a ghost. They mimicked my voice behind closed doors, not realizing the walls were thin and my ears, still sharp. They took down the books I loved from the shelves, some signed by authors I had met, others filled with notes and underlines from decades of reading, and gave them away. Just like that. No permission, no care. As if my world could be packed up in a cardboard box and left at the front door for charity. The clothes I chose with care, my Sunday dresses and my soft cardigans, became their mockery. "That color's too loud for you, don't you think?" they'd say. Or worse, "People your age should dress modestly." Every day, they chipped away at my dignity with a smile. Every laugh, every sigh of irritation when I asked a question, every ear-roll when I expressed an opinion, it all became part of a quiet campaign to erase me. But I wasn't made of silence. Late at night, when the house settled and their footsteps faded, I would reach beneath the sheets and pull out the little notebook I'd hidden between the linens. The cover was worn, the pages thin, but it held the only place where I still existed fully. I wrote in the dark, sometimes by memory alone, sometimes by the weak light from the hallway that slipped through the crack under the door. Each word I penned was a scream I couldn't voice aloud, each sentence a reclaiming of myself. I wrote about the phone, the books, the laughter. I recorded the exact words they used to belittle me. I described their faces, their tones, their shifting eyes when guests came over, and they pretended everything was normal. I wrote until my hands cramped and my eyes blurred, until the weight in my chest felt just a little bit lighter. I wrote because I knew I couldn't let them win, not quietly, not without record. I was more than the chair I sat in, more than the meals they brought and left cold on the table. I had lived a full life. I had seen war and peace, raised children, buried love, built resilience out of grief. And now, I was being treated like furniture, something to be dusted, moved around, ignored. The notebook became my companion, my voice, my resistance. Sometimes I wrote to myself. Sometimes I wrote to my husband, whose absence I felt most on the hardest days. Sometimes I wrote letters to my grandson, imagining he would find them one day and understand everything. I didn't know when or how, but I believed one day someone would read these pages and see me for who I truly was. And so I ask you, how many elders around us are being silenced with smiles, mocked behind closed doors, erased while still breathing? What would you do if it were your own blood being treated like a burden? Let me know in the comments. Have you ever witnessed someone being quietly broken by those who claimed to love them? Liam had always been the quiet one. At 14, he preferred books to video games, silence to noise. He saw things others missed. Maybe it was because he spent more time observing than speaking. Maybe it was because he had the heart of someone older than his years. Or maybe it was because he had always felt closer to his grandmother than anyone else in the house. When the adults rolled their eyes at her stories, he leaned in. When they laughed at her clothes, he noticed the quiet way she folded her hands, pretending not to hear. But it wasn't until the silence grew too loud that Liam really started to understand. It was a Thursday afternoon. He came home early from school, unnoticed, headphones in but no music playing. That's when he heard it. His mother's voice, sharp, mocking. She doesn't even know what year it is. Honestly, what's the point of keeping her here? Laughter followed. Not the kind that makes a room warm, but the kind that leaves it cold. Liam stopped in the hallway. He could see the living room, just a sliver. His grandmother, Eleanor, sat curled into the corner of the couch, her eyes vacant, hands trembling slightly. She wasn't broken. She was shrinking, not from age, but from neglect. Later that evening, while his parents busied themselves with their devices and each other, Liam quietly approached her. "Gran," he whispered. She turned, startled, then smiled. A soft, tired smile. "You okay?" he asked. "Of course, dear," she replied, but her eyes betrayed her words. They were glassy, distant, and swollen. He noticed something peeking out from beneath the couch cushions later that night when she'd gone to bed. A corner of a notebook. He pulled it free, his hands trembling slightly. It was worn, edges frayed. Inside, delicate cursive filled the pages. "Day 47, they took my books today. Said I wouldn't miss them. I did. I remembered every title." Another page. "Liam smiled at me today. He doesn't know it, but it kept me going." Liam closed the notebook and sat in the dark, his chest heavy. The shame didn't belong to him, but it wrapped around him just the same. How could the people who raised him be so cruel to the woman who once held them all together? He remembered her in better days, reading to him under a blanket fort, teaching him how to write his name, bandaging his knees and baking his favorite cookies. She hadn't changed. They had. He began to watch more closely. He started noting every time someone dismissed her, spoke over her, moved her things without asking. Every sigh, every joke, every moment they acted like she was invisible. He memorized the way she flinched at loud voices, how she barely touched her food at dinner, how she waited for them to leave the room before taking a deep breath. One evening, he saw his father rip a letter in half. A letter Eleanor had clearly tried to mail. "She doesn't need to talk to anyone," his father muttered. Liam bit his lip so hard it bled. That night, he went back to the notebook and wrote a message on a fresh page. "You're not alone. I see you. I believe you." From that day on, he became her quiet protector. He asked questions. He offered to bring her tea. He started helping her with things she didn't ask for, like turning on her favorite radio station or fixing the loose buttons on her cardigans. His parents scoffed. "She's turning him against us," his mother said. But Liam knew the truth. No one could turn him away from love. Only cruelty could do that. He secretly photocopied pages from her notebook and saved them to a USB drive. He recorded conversations, not just the words, but the tones. He filmed short clips when they weren't paying attention. His mother mocking Eleanor's old dress, his father huffing when she asked to open a window. Bit by bit, Liam collected the truth. One day, he stayed home, pretending to be sick, while everyone else was gone. He sat with Eleanor and asked her everything. Her voice cracked, but she spoke about the loneliness, the silence, the feeling of being erased. And for the first time, someone listened, not with pity, but with respect. When his parents came back, Liam looked them in the eye. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His silence spoke louder than their excuses. He knew what he had to do. And he would do it not just for Eleanor, but for everyone who'd ever been pushed aside, because sometimes the strongest warriors aren't the loudest. They're the ones who notice, the ones who speak when it matters, and the ones who refuse to look away. So now I ask, have you ever stayed silent when someone you love was being hurt? What would you do if the only voice they had was yours? Liam had never been a loud boy. He didn't demand attention, didn't speak unless he had something worth saying. But what he lacked in volume, he made up for, in perception. He noticed things. And for weeks now, he had been watching his grandmother Mabel fade before his very eyes. Not in body, no, her back was still straight, her steps still graceful, but something had shifted behind her eyes. The warmth she once carried like a candle in her chest had dimmed. She smiled less, spoke less. Her stories, once vibrant and filled with memory, were now met with dismissive chuckles or cold silence. He had always admired her. Mabel, 79, had been the town's beloved librarian for over 4 decades. She taught him how to read, how to listen, how to ask questions. And now, every time he passed by the living room and saw her sitting there alone, her hands folded tightly in her lap, he knew something was wrong. One night, from his room, Liam heard his mother scoff. "She acts like she's royalty just because she read some books. Honestly, she should be thanking us for letting her stay here." Another voice, his father's, laughed in agreement. Liam's stomach turned. He quietly walked to the hallway, heart pounding, and peeked into the living room. There was Mabel, sitting silently, eyes locked on the carpet, not watching TV, not knitting, just existing. He opened the door, stepped in, and sat beside her. She looked at him with startled eyes, then quickly offered a smile, but he saw it, the moisture pooling in her lashes, the way she blinked quickly, trying to keep it from falling. He didn't ask anything, he just held her hand. Over the next few days, Liam paid closer attention. He noticed how the adults ignored her at dinner, how they rolled their eyes when she asked simple questions, how they turned the volume up when she tried to speak. He saw the small stack of books in her room slowly disappear, her radio gone, her favorite shawl tossed in a donation box. Then, one afternoon, while putting away her laundry, he found something tucked deep within the folds of her bedsheet. A notebook, old, worn, the pages filled with small, neat handwriting. His name was on one of the pages, followed by, "If you ever find this, I want you to know I remember everything, every kindness, every cruelty. I write because I must keep myself from vanishing completely." He read entry after entry. They weren't just journal notes, they were survival records. Times she was humiliated, words that stung, moments she wasn't allowed to cry. Her grief dripped from every sentence, and that's when something clicked. Liam wasn't just a bystander. He was a witness with a voice, and he would not stay quiet. He started recording, quietly, on his phone, voices mocking her, jokes made at her expense, orders barked as if she were a nuisance. Mabel never knew, until one afternoon, after school, he came home, locked his room, and played the recordings for his guidance counselor. The reaction was immediate. The counselor, shaken, alerted social services. An investigation was launched, and within a week, people started showing up. At first, the family acted calm, polite, but the cracks began to show. Mabel was questioned gently. She tried to deny the worst of it, tried to protect the same people who had wounded her, but then, Liam stepped forward. He showed them the notebook, he showed them the recordings, he told them everything. And for the first time in what felt like years, Mabel cried without shame, not because of the pain, but because someone believed her. Someone stood up. She hugged Liam, her hands trembling, and whispered, "They thought I was weak, but they forgot you carry my blood." Sometimes, justice doesn't wear a uniform. Sometimes, it walks on quiet teenage feet. Now tell me, do you believe that strength skips generations? Or does it come back when it's most needed? Leave your thoughts below. The silence that once cloaked the truth had now been broken. The diary, once hidden between wrinkled sheets and guarded like a sacred treasure, now rested in the hands of people who could make a difference. It wasn't just ink on paper, it was the weight of years. Every page, a voice, every sentence, a scream that had long been silenced by rolled eyes and closed doors. And now, those voices were about to be heard where it mattered. Liam, the quiet observer turned unexpected warrior, stood beside his grandmother with a spine of steel. He had witnessed it all, the mocking glances, the stolen books, the words that bruised more than fists ever could. But what he hadn't expected was the strength that pulsed beneath his grandmother's silence. He thought he was protecting her, but now he saw she had been enduring, calculating, preparing. They stepped into the office of a local advocate for elder rights, documents in hand and hearts pounding. The social worker didn't need convincing. A few recorded clips were enough to paint a brutal picture. The laughter behind closed doors, the dismissals, the snide comments passed like poison at dinner tables. Then came the diary, placed on the desk like evidence in a courtroom where love had long since vanished. The authorities took over swiftly. A team visited the house under the guise of a wellness check. What they found validated every word Mabel had written. She didn't have to say much, the bruises weren't physical, but her eyes spoke volumes. The officers noticed the empty bookshelf, the absence of personal items in her room, the way her chair was positioned to face a blank wall instead of the window. Her daughter-in-law tried to cover it all with a tired smirk. "She's old, she gets confused sometimes. It's just a misunderstanding." But the officers weren't buying it. One of them opened a folder and laid out printed screenshots of text messages, photos from Liam's phone, and recordings of conversations where her son and daughter-in-law ridiculed her behind her back. The truth was unshakable now. They informed Mabel that she would be leaving with them for her safety, for her dignity. She nodded once, stood slowly, and reached for her small handbag. Her steps were measured, firm, like a queen walking through the wreckage of a fallen kingdom. Liam stood beside her, his shoulders squared, refusing to let her walk out alone. Her son arrived just as they were stepping into the front yard. His voice was sharp, filled with urgency and fake concern. "Mom, wait, you don't have to go, let's talk." She didn't flinch, didn't stop, only turned her head slightly and met his gaze with a calm that came from knowing she had already won. "You may have ignored me," she said, her voice strong, "but I never stopped seeing the truth," he faltered. The boy who had once clung to her dress as a child was now just a man standing in the ruins of his own choices. And she walked forward, leaving behind the house she built, but carrying with her everything they couldn't steal: her will, her worth, her name. Now I ask you, how many times have people tried to erase someone just because they thought they were powerless? If you had the power to speak up like Liam did, would you have done the same? Or would you stay silent while someone's dignity was being stripped away, one smirk at a time? After years of silence, Mabel finally found a space where her voice wasn't just heard, it was welcomed. The small house in the quiet village wasn't extravagant, but it was hers, surrounded by trees that danced with the wind and birds that greeted the mornings with song. She rediscovered a rhythm of peace that she thought was long gone. No more footsteps, filled with tension, no more whispering behind closed doors, no more pretending to be invisible just to survive another day. Here, in this modest corner of the world, she was Mabel again, not a burden, not a shadow, but a whole woman. The living room had shelves lined with books she chose herself. She filled the space with soft colors, family photos she had rescued from dusty boxes, and a chair by the window where she now spent mornings sipping tea while watching the sunrise. Her heart, once tight with unspoken grief, now stretched with each breath of fresh air, with each visit from Liam, whose eyes no longer carried the guilt of a boy watching injustice, but the pride of a young man who helped rewrite his grandmother's ending. Mabel began writing, not in secret, but boldly. Letters to newspapers, messages to community leaders, pages for her upcoming memoir. Her story, once confined to tear-stained sheets hidden under a mattress, now had wings, and people listened. Invitations came from local groups, churches, and schools. They wanted to hear about the woman who overcame neglect not by revenge, but by rising. She stood in front of crowds, her voice steady, her gaze unwavering, speaking truths many feared to name. She talked about dignity in aging, about how family isn't defined by blood alone, and about the silent strength that blooms in people society forgets. She wasn't trying to be anyone's hero, but the way she carried herself, the way she smiled even when the questions hurt, the way she hugged each person who came to her after the talks made her unforgettable. Mabel's door remained open. Neighbors stopped by with baked goods. Former students wrote her letters. Strangers sent her flowers. The home that had once been her prison was replaced by one filled with warmth, laughter, and the steady hum of healing. Liam never missed a visit. On weekends, he would help her with the garden. It became their ritual. Each Saturday, they planted something new: roses, lilies, mint, lavender. Mabel said it reminded her of life. Some things grow quickly, others take time, but all things need care, patience, and belief. Watching Liam dig with his hands in the soil, watching him grow into the kind of man the world needs more of, filled her with a joy so deep it left no room for old wounds. One day, as they finished planting a row of daffodils, Liam looked up and said, "They'll never laugh like that again, Grandma." Mabel nodded, because now, they know, and so do I. She didn't need revenge. Her justice was peace. Her victory was in every word spoken, every flower planted, every soul touched by her journey. In that moment, with the golden sun casting long shadows behind them, Mabel took a deep breath. The air smelled like earth and promise. And as she reached for Liam's hand, she knew the silence that once suffocated her had been transformed into something powerful, something beautiful. Now tell me, have you ever underestimated someone's strength just because they were quiet? What if that silence was the very thing preparing them to rise? There are moments in life when silence becomes heavier than words, when your presence in a room is met not with acknowledgement but with absence of care, when the people you once held, protected, fed, and nurtured act as though you are now merely furniture there, but unnoticed. Mabel knew this silence intimately. It wasn't the kind of quiet that brings peace. It was the kind that suffocates, the kind that steals identity little by little. But even in that silence, her soul was speaking. Because you see, dignity doesn't fade with age. Respect isn't something you earn once and lose with wrinkles. True worth isn't erased by forgetfulness, by gray hair, or by the slowness of steps. They thought she had grown too old to matter, too quiet to fight, too invisible to be a threat. But they forgot that behind every woman who survives disrespect, there is a fire built not by rage, but by resilience. A lifetime of building, nurturing, overcoming, of making a way where there was none. She carried her history in her bones. 50 years of partnership, of building a home, raising children, creating memories. And even when they mocked her voice, stripped her books away, laughed at her clothes, tried to erase her name from her own story, she chose not to retaliate with noise. She watched, she listened, she waited, because the truth, when nurtured in silence, becomes a force that no one can stand against when it rises. Mabel's redemption didn't come wrapped in rage. It came in calm steps, in the courage of a grandson who refused to be blind, in the clarity of evidence no longer hidden, in the strength of a voice they believed had disappeared. Her justice didn't scream, it arrived with dignity. It walked through the doors they tried to close and lit the room they tried to keep dark. There's something sacred about being seen again, about having someone say, "You matter," about no longer feeling like a shadow in your own life. And for Mabel, that moment was more than victory, it was resurrection. The tears she cried were never wasted. They watered the roots of a strength the world underestimated. And now, she stood tall, not with revenge in her heart, but with peace in her chest, with clarity in her voice, with power in her steps. And maybe that's the message for you today. Maybe you've been made to feel like your voice is too small, like your story doesn't matter, like your time has passed. But hear this, you are not done. Your value doesn't expire. Your soul didn't shrink with the years, it grew deeper. And if you feel like no one is listening, start writing anyway. Start speaking anyway. Because someone, somewhere, will need your story to find their own strength. The world doesn't need more noise, it needs more truth. And truth is often born in the quiet strength of those who refuse to disappear. So if Mabel's story touched something in you, if you saw a part of yourself, or someone you love, in her journey, don't leave without taking action. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your story could be the next one that lights up someone's darkness. And don't forget to stay tuned, because in the next video, we'll uncover another truth that was buried in silence, and what happens when someone finally dares to speak it.